Hi, I'm Sherilyn from Evoca. In this video, I will show you how to save out your textures from Photoshop correctly and import them into the UDK. So I've currently gone and opened up the Selena body texture and the Selena head texture. These are both PSD files which you would have created when you were doing the 3D modeling of Selena. Now we're just going to take the body texture for now. Now you already have a diffuse because when you imported Selena, we opted to choose the material as well as importing the texture. So we've already got a diffuse, we've already got a spec, and we've already got a normal map. But if you decided you wanted to make changes to any of those, you still have the Photoshop file where you can make the changes, resave that, and re-import that into the engine. So all we need from here is just a few little things. Now, one of the things we do need is with SSS, subsurface scattering, we don't need it on all parts of the body. We only want it on the skin. So what we need to do is we need to create a mask where it shows just the skin and not the rest of the body. Now, if you have a look, we've already created some masks in our list here. We've got a skin AO, a close AO. Now, as you can see, the skin here has already got a selection. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a mask using that selection so we can just pull that out for the SSS. Very simple to do. All you do is you hold down the control key on the keyboard and click on this button here. And if you have a look in here, we've got the marching ants. That's selected just the skin. That is perfect. That is all we need to mask out the SSS. So what we'll do is we'll come to the top and we'll hit this button to create a new layer. And we'll close the diffuse or hide it. With that still selected, what we want is we want this to be white and the background to be black because it looks at the background as an invisible thing. So with that still marching, make sure you've got white and select the paint bucket tool. And click. And that will paint that white. And what we want to do is the outer layer here, we want to paint that black. So while that's still selected, go up to Select, Inverse. Now click on this little arrow here, that'll reverse the black and the white. So black is there. While you've still got the paint bucket, come over here and click. And that will create the mask that we want. This is all we need to be able to pull out just the skin for the SSS shader. To deselect that, it's just Control D. Now we also need to make sure that it's the correct size. This at the moment will be 4096, but I have already gone through and saved this down. So you need to check that it's the right size. To do that, you just go to Image and Image Size. Oh, as you can see, it's 4096. So I do want to save this down. I'll just make it 2048 because if you remember when we brought in the other texture, it showed up as 2048. And OK. And we'll just let it size down. OK. Now what we need to do is save that out. We also need to make sure that it is on RGB and not indexed or grayscale. Now this should be on RGB, but to double check that, all you do is you come to Image, Mode, and you've got your different options here. And RGB color is tick, so that is correct. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll save this out. Now we'll save this out as a Targa. So go to File, Save As. And what we'll do is we'll go to where you created all those different folders and we'll save that text under there. So go into your UDK month, go to UDK game, content, the unit number, and textures. Now we don't want to save it as a photo type, so click on the drop down arrow and scroll down until you see Targa. And I've already got one that I did here earlier, but I will override this. What we want to do is we want to call it Selena Body Mask. So make sure it's called Selena Body Mask. And select Save. Now because mine already exists, I do want to replace it. Yours may not. It may not ask this. That's fine. It'll now come up with some target options. Now, because we don't have an alpha in this, we just want to set it as 24 bits per pixel. I will explain alphas when we get to that for the head texture. So leave it as 24 bits per pixel and OK. Now that's done. Now the next step we want to do is we want to save out the other bits that we created in Photoshop, the epidermis, the backscattering and so forth, so we can set up the SSS shader correctly. So if you were to scroll down and go into your skin section, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the mask I created and turn on diffuse. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the skin and the close AO. And what I want to do is I want to come into the skin section here. So if we maximize the skin texture here, we have got these different passes here. We've got the epidermis, subdermal, dermal, and the backscattering pass. I'll just turn off the dirt, the eye, and the clothing. Okay, so if we have a look, we have got the epidermis, which is just a basic flat sort of a colour. Turn that off and turn on subdermal. That's more like the fleshy, the muscles section, as you can see. And then we've got the backscattering. If I turn that off, you've got your backscattering as well, which is similar to your muscle section. So what we'll do is we'll save out the epidermis first. So with that selected, just that one on, come up and go File, Save As, and we'll save it as a target. And go to the section that you have got your folder in. So UDK game, content, unit number and texture. And we'll call this Selena Body Epidermis. And save. We want 24 bits pixel. Okay. Okay, the next one is the subdermal pass that we want to save out. So with epidermis unticked, subdermal pass on, go File, Save As. Again, go to the same location you want to save it at. UDK game, content, unit number, textures. Turn that into a target. And we'll change the word texture and turn it into subdermal. And save. 24 bits pixel. And then the last one we want is the backscattering pass. So select backscattering. And again, File, Save As. Go to the location of your UDK. UDK game, content, unit number, textures, turn it into a target, and we'll change that to backscatter. And save. 24 bits pixel. Okay. So it's as simple as that for saving out the body. Now we want to do a similar thing with the head as well. So what we'll do is we'll close this, and I'm not going to save it. So up to you if you want to save it. I personally am not, so let's close that. Okay, so now on the head, what we need to do is we need to create another mask for the skin. So only the SSS gets applied for the skin. So the same way that we actually created a mask for the body, we'll do for the head. So if we scroll down, and we've got the AO. The mask here on the AO would be perfect for the skin. So come to the skin AO, hold down the control key and click inside the image. So you create a selection. And then what we'll do is come back to the top and create a new layer. And then we'll come down and turn off the diffuse and any other maps that might be turned on. And just like what we did with the body, we'll create a mask for this. So we make sure that this is white, and we click, and it's painted at white. And then we want to inverse that selection and we want to paint that black. Now because this is split up into 3, I'll have to click 3 times. So one in here, and one in here to flood fill all that. And there's our mask for our head. So Control D, that will deselect it. Make sure that the image size is 1024 because I noticed in the engine we've got the head as 1024 texture when it brought it in from 3ds Max. So make sure width and height is 1024 and OK. That'll just take a second and then we'll save that out. So File, Save As, choose Targa, and of course go to your UDK where you have actually put all your content and go to UDK, Content, the unit and textures, and we'll call this Selena Head Mask and hit Save. We want it to be 24 bits pixel and OK. Right, now because Selena has been created with 2 parts to the eye, you've got the cornea and of course the eyeball. The reason why she showed up white eyes in the engine is because we needed to create a mask on the texture to plug into the opacity mask to basically mask that out so the eyeball color would come through. Now you will have already created a alpha map on your head texture. So if you come into the channels and you'll see we've got an alpha map. And this is exactly what we need for it to work properly. So what we'll do is make sure alpha map is there, and it looks like so. And turn on your diffuse. And what we're going to do is we're going to resave this out with the alpha map. Now you'll also notice that when you've got alpha map ticked, the eyeball here, it shows up as bright red in areas. That's what we want. That just means those bits are going to be masked out. And of course the hair is going to be masked out in pieces as well because it's not totally solid. So we'll have the hair and of course the eye. So with that selected, go to File, Save As, make it a Targa. Of course go to your UDK area section, UDK Game, Content, the unit, textures, and we're going to call this Selena Head Diff for diffuse. You'll notice that alpha channels is ticked. That's exactly what we want. So if I hit save, now 24 bits pixel does not save the alpha mask. We need to make sure it's 32 bits pixel. So select 32 bits pixel and OK. Done. That has saved Selena's head texture with an alpha mask so we can mask out the eyeball and of course the hair so it looks better. So the next thing we want to do is we want to save out the other parts for the SSS shader to work correctly. So we will have already created that in the Photoshop file. So if you come down to your skin and expand on the skin, you created an epidermis, a subdermal pass, and a backscattering pass. We now need to save those out as separate textures. So if we turn off all the other parts of the skin, we can turn off the hair as well. Okay, we'll turn off the subdermal and the backscattering pass so we can save just the epidermis. So with the subdermal pass and backscattering pass not selected, make sure epidermis is shown and we'll save that out. So File, Save As, and Targa, and of course the location of your UDK, the month, UDK Game, Content, Unit, Textures, and what we'll do is we'll call this one Selena Head Epidermis. And save. Now we've already got a texture with an alpha, we don't need to worry about it any further. So just hit 24 bits pixel and OK, and that saved the epidermis. Now hide epidermis and unhide subdermal pass. This is the next one I'm going to save. So with that selected, go File, Save As, And of course the usual location. And we will call this subdermal. And 24 bits pixel. And then the last one is the backscattering. File, save as, make it a target, go to your location, the month, UDK game, content, the unit, textures, and we shall call this one backscatter. And save. 24 bits pixel and OK. So those are the passes we need to now take into the engine so we can set up the SSS shader properly. Okay, so open up the engine, and what we'll do is we'll now import those textures that we created. So once you've got it open up the content browser. And what we need to do is, if you had shut the UDK like I had earlier, we need to load up the assets again. So if you remember right, all we do is we come to where we've created it, right click and left click on fully load, and that will load everything up. So what we're now going to do is we're now going to re-import the textures and apply them to an SSS shader. So the first thing we need to do is come down to import and click import. And then we go to our location where we've stored them, so the unit, textures, and here they all are here. Now what I like to do is I like to do it all at once except for the normal maps, because the normal maps you have to do something special to, and I also like to do the textures that have got an alpha separately as well. So what we're going to bring in first is we're going to bring in everything except for the diffuse head texture and the normal maps. So select all textures that you need. So the backscatter of the body, the epidermis of the body mask, the body subdermal, the head backscatter, the head epidermis, and the head mask, as well as the head subdermal. So open that. Now, because these don't have alphas on it, I can actually tick compression no alpha, which will make the file size a lot smaller. This is why when I'm bringing in a whole stack of textures I've done, including normal maps, I will bring in just those that I know are diffuse type textures without alphas, and then I'll bring in those that are diffuse textures with alphas, and then later on the normal maps. So we want a compression no alpha ticked. It's an opaque and a TC default. If you happen to bring in normal maps, this is where you would click on the drop down arrow and choose TC normal map. But the normal map's already been brought in. We don't need to worry about that. Now here's the grouping. As you remember, we created one called mesh, which you can sort of see to the side here. We want to create a grouping called textures. So come into grouping and type in textures. Because we selected the unit that we want to save it to, I don't need to pick the asset or the package. It's already here. And I'm going to leave the name as is. So because this is all correct for these ones, click OK to all. Depending on how large the textures are, these may take a while, so I'll pause this video while they import. Okay, and here you go. Here are all the textures that we have brought in. So again, remember the little asterisks, we need to save. So right click and save, and we'll let that save. Okay, the next thing we need to do is we need to import the rest of the textures, which is only really one, and it's going to replace the head texture that Max automatically brought in, because this will have the alpha on it. So this time, select the textures group, that way we don't have to worry about changing it when we import. Go to import, and we will choose the Selena head diff. So select it and click open. Now we want to make sure that compression no alpha is not ticked. This is the only time you don't tick it, is if you've got an alpha map inside a texture. So make sure that is not ticked, leave everything else as default and click OK. Now because there's only one texture, OK to all or OK doesn't really matter. So we'll bring this in, and there we have it. Again, we brought it and we made a change, so we need to save this. So right click and save. Now, because Max brought in some of its own textures, it didn't give us an opportunity to create a texture group. So just to keep things neat and tidy, I like to make sure all my textures are in the texture group, my materials in the material group, meshes, and so forth. So if we come into mesh, we will see we've got materials and textures in here. What I want to do is I want to move these textures into the texture directory, and later on we'll move the material into the material. Now, because I re-imported the Selena head, I don't need to worry about this one, so this can be removed, but I'll remove this later as well. I'll show you how to do that a little later. So what I want to do is I want to grab the body diff, the normal, hold down the control key and click, the spec, and the head normal, and the head spec. And what we're going to do is we're going to move these from here into the textures group. So with all them selected, just right click anywhere on one of these selected and choose move or rename. Now, we're not going to rename, we're just going to move. So click move or rename and it'll bring up an option here. Grouping. Now, we don't want to type in textures again, we've already got it. This little arrow here, or this little button here, brings up the groups. Unfortunately, it's on the other screen. Sorry about that, but it won't let me move it. This will actually ask you what group you'd like to put it in. So make sure you select the textures and click OK. It'll put it in there. And we can OK to all. And that's moved it out of the mesh and into here. So what we can do now is right click and save. That way, all our textures are all as one. It's easy to find. Now, if I was to delete this head texture, Selena, if you double click on the mesh, her head texture would disappear and she'll have just the default thing that Epic puts up. So I'm not going to worry about that yet. We'll delete that one later because in the next lesson, we will go and create the SSS shader. So in this lesson, what you have learned is how to create mask maps, how to save out the different types of maps for an SSS shader from Photoshop, and how to import them into the UDK.